Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump withdrew the United States from the sweeping Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal known as the TPP Monday. It would have encompassed 12 Pacific Rim nations, including the U.S., and 40% of the global economy. The TPP faced years of global public resistance by those who say free trade deals benefit corporations at the expense of health and environmental regulations. The TPP became a major issue during the 2016 presidential campaign. Donald Trump, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, and eventually former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton all said they would withdraw from the deal if elected. Lori Wallach of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch said Trump's executive order Monday, quote, will bury the moldering corpse of a deal that couldn't gain majority support in Congress. But the question is going forward, will President Trump's new trade policies create American jobs and reduce our damaging trade deficit while raising wages and protecting the environment and public health, not just here, but also in trade partner nations, Wallach asked. On Monday, President Trump also reinstated the controversial global gag rule, a Reagan-era policy that bans U.S. funding for any international health care organizations that perform abortions, advocate for the legalization of abortion, or even provide information about abortion. This is White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
The president, it's no secret, has made it very clear that he's a pro-life president. He wants to stand up for all Americans, including the unborn. And I think the reinstatement of this policy is not just something that echoes that value, but respects taxpayer funding as well, and ensures that we're standing up not just for life for the unborn, but for also taxpayer funds that are being spent overseas to perform an action that is contrary to the values of this president, and I think continue to further illustrate, not just to the folks here in this country, but around the world, of what a value we place on life.
Trump signed the global gag rule only 2 days after millions of people poured into the streets of Washington, D.C. and cities around the world for the historic Women's March on Washington. We'll have more on the global gag rule after headlines. President Trump had his first meeting with congressional lawmakers Monday, during which he again lied about the 2016 election results. He falsely claimed he lost the popular vote because 3 to 5 million unauthorized immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton. Experts say there's no evidence of voter fraud during the 2016 election. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer's vowed the United States would take a hard military line against China in the South Chinese Sea, one of the busiest trade routes in the world, which also has significant oil and gas reserves. The U.S. claims the area is international water, while China claims territorial control. Longtime ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson said during his confirmation hearing for Secretary of State he would stop China from accessing islands where it has installed weapon systems and built airstrips in the area. Tillerson's comments prompted Chinese state media to say the U.S. would have to wage war to stop China from accessing the islands. Spicer also suggested Monday the Trump administration would move quickly to push through the contested $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline.
I'm not going to get in front of the president's executive actions, but I will tell you that areas like Dakota and the Keystone Pipeline, areas that we can increase jobs, increase economic growth, and tap into America's energy supply more. That's something that he has been very clear about. I think the president is very, very keen on making sure that we maximize our use of natural resources to America's benefit. It's good for economic growth, it's good for jobs, and it's good for American energy.
The pipeline has faced months of resistance from the Standing Rock Sioux in North Dakota, members of hundreds of Native American tribes, as well as their non-Native allies. On Monday, here at the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, water protectors blocked the entrance to a Chase Bank lounge to protest the connection of one of the festival's leading sponsors to investment in the Dakota Access Pipeline. This is Bobby Jean Threelegs of the Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota.
Right now, we're on a lockdown in front of Chase Bank because we want people across America to divest their money from these banks. The big banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, all the big banks, these are paying for the pipelines around the country. We want you to know what your money is being paid for and what it's being used for. And pretty much our lives are at risk right now. Everybody, there's already people's waters ruined around the country, and we're just trying to protect that. We want to know that seven generations ahead that our children are going to be okay.
White House Press Secretary Secretary Sean Spicer said Monday the United States has not decided whether it will attempt to take the controversial step of moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The move is fiercely opposed by Palestinians and much of the world community. This is Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
We say to Mr. Trump that we hope he will not move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem because Jerusalem, from the Israeli point of view, is a united city, and this is not correct and illegal. Therefore, moving the embassy to any place will be a step ahead of anything that may happen in the future and will damage the peace process. Also, we hope to stop these comments and to start negotiations based on international legitimacy.
That was Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. During Monday's news conference, Sean Spicer also refused to answer repeated questions by reporters about what the national unemployment rate is. He ultimately claimed the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out several versions of this figure. Former Kansas Congressman Mike Pompeo was sworn in as CIA director after being approved by the Senate Monday. His confirmation had faced opposition over concerns about his position on torture. In the past, Pompeo falsely claimed so-called enhanced interrogation tactics, such as waterboarding, were constitutional. But he reversed his decision during his confirmation hearing, saying he's now against torture. On Monday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee voted 11-10 to approve longtime ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State. Florida Senator Marco Rubio was the swing vote. He had said he might vote against Tillerson, but instead decided to back him. Tillerson's confirmation will go before the full Senate next week. Georgia Congressmember Tom Price faces his second confirmation hearing to head the Department of Health and Human Services today, where he's expected to face more questions about his investments in medical and drug companies and potential conflicts of interest. Democrats have delayed the confirmation vote for Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General. The Senate Judiciary Committee was slated to vote on his confirmation today, but will now vote January 31st. If approved, the full Senate will not vote until February. Democrats have also asked for a second confirmation hearing for billionaire Betsy DeVos for Education Secretary amidst widespread concerns about potential conflicts of interest stemming from her family's many investments, including in private charter schools and a student loan company. Trump has tapped Federal Communications Commissioner Ajit Pai to be the FCC chair. Pai is a fierce opponent of net neutrality rules, which seek to keep the Internet open and prevent corporate service providers from blocking access to websites, slowing down content, or providing paid fast lanes for Internet service. Activists fear Pai may now roll back net neutrality rules adopted by the FCC in recent years. U.S. officials say they're investigating a phone call between President Trump's national security advisor Michael Flynn and Russia's ambassador to the United States. The call was on December 29th, the same day President Obama imposed sanctions against Russia and expelled diplomats as retaliation for the alleged Russian hacking of the U.S. election. U.S. officials are also investigating a handful of Donald Trump's close associates, including former campaign manager Paul Manafort, over possible ties to Russia. President Trump is handing ambassadorships to two of his major campaign donors. Private equity executive Louis Eisenberg, who began his career at Goldman Sachs, will become the U.S. ambassador to Italy. Private equity executive William Hagerty, who served as an economic advisor to George H.W. Bush, will become the U.S. ambassador to Japan. In Yemen, one of the first drone strikes launched under the new Trump administration killed at least 10 people Saturday. Yemeni news reports say the victims of the strike were al-Qaeda fighters. U.S.-backed Saudi-led airstrikes killed more than 50 people over the weekend as part of the Saudi and Yemeni armies' campaign to seize control of Mocha. On Monday, the Yemeni army said it had taken control of the port city. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is suing the nation's largest student loan servicer, Navient, accusing it of, quote, systematically and illegally failing borrowers at every stage of repayment, unquote. Navient services $300 billion in private and federal loans. The suit argues the company illegally increased the cost of the loans for millions of students. In Mexico, widespread protests against the government's decision to raise fuel prices by more than 20% continue to rock the country. On Sunday, protesters took to the streets for coordinated demonstrations in Mexico City and at least 12 Mexican states. Protesters in Tijuana seized control of one of the busiest border crossings along the U.S. border, forcing Mexican authorities to abandon their posts. This is one of the protesters.
I am here because I am in disagreement with all the policies of the government of Enrique Peña Nieto and what his whole cabinet has imposed on this country, which has caused a lack of equality, inflation. They continue to rob, continue taking from the country.
New York City taxpayers will pay $75 million to settle a class action lawsuit against the New York Police Department over its issuing of nearly 1 million criminal summons that were later dismissed for lack of evidence. Lawyers say the summons were selectively and disproportionately issued in communities of color. The British Supreme Court has ruled the British Parliament must approve Britain's plans to leave the European Union, a process known as Brexit. The 8-3 ruling Tuesday does not mean Britain will stay in the EU, although it could delay Brexit and allows pro-EU lawmakers to influence the terms of Britain's departure. In news from Trump inauguration protests, the legal team behind Friday's Disrupt J20 actions in Washington, D.C., has sued the police for using excessive force when officers attacked protesters with batons, tear gas, pepper spray, and flashbang grenades indiscriminately and repeatedly, they said. Well over 200 protesters were arrested Friday, nearly all of them facing a possible 10-year prison sentence after being charged with felony riot. Their cell phones, which were confiscated by police after arrest, have not been returned. And nationwide, activists are taking to social media to declare their support for Palestinian-American activist Linda Sarsour, who's facing Islamophobic attacks online after she served as one of the 4 main organizing co-chairs of the Women's March on Washington. On Monday, Sarsour called for extra prayers in a Facebook post, writing, quote, "The opposition cannot fathom to see a Palestinian Muslim-American woman that resonates with the masses. They have a coordinated attack campaign against me, and it's vicious and ugly," she said. In response, thousands of people and organizations, including Amnesty International, are showing their support for Sarsour using the hashtag #IMarchWithLinda. This is Linda Sarsour speaking to 500,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. Saturday for that Women's March on Washington.
If you have come here today as your first time at a march, I welcome you. I ask you to stand and continue to keep your voices loud for Black women, for Native women, for undocumented women, for our LGBTQIA communities, for people with disabilities. If you want to know if you are going the right way, follow women of color, sisters and brothers. We know where we need to go, and we know where justice is.
Yeah, you try. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.